I did a couple amateur shows back in Clinton, New Jersey, with the music hall players there, which is quite a popular group. And incidentally, I like that last note.
Thank you. Thanks.
And all the rest of it.
Thank you.
Lee Van Cleef was loved by everyone because he was a nasty man. People continued to remember Lee Van Cleef's one-of-a-kind appearance and acting talent with regard to his role as Angel Eyes in the film The Good, The Bad, and the Ugly all over the world. Eyes that are narrow but cold like steel, a hawk nose and high cheekbones, a face that is taciturn and balanced, and the capacity to communicate without words via the use of eyes and body language are all characteristics of this individual. In spite of this, those angel eyes concealed mysteries and tragedies that had not been spoken about, a life filled with adversity, a near-death experience, and a broken heart. However, it wasn't until much later that his wife divulged the information that we had been keeping hidden about her late husband. Participate with us in order to discover what he conceals behind those icy eyes. Younger years. Somerville, New Jersey was the location of Lee Van Cleef's birth on January 9, 1925. His parents, Clarence Leroy Van Cleef and Marion Lavinia Van Cleef, were devout followers of the Christian faith. Van Cleef's parents brought him up on a farm and instilled in him a deep appreciation for the natural world. Despite the fact that his father worked as a pharmacist and his mother was a concert pianist and vocalist, Van Cleef had previously experienced his first attempt at paddling a canoe along the Raritan River when he was only 2 years old. This is the answer to your question, if you have ever questioned where. Businesses got the idea of requiring years of experience for entry-level positions. Since the beginning, the most important thing to do is to begin gathering materials for your portfolio as soon as you are able to complete the first 2 phases. Van Cleef, when he was a young boy, made camping vacations a favorite activity. He also joined the Boy Scouts, where he excelled in activities such as swimming, life-saving, and archery. Despite the fact that Van Cleef was exceptionally skilled in his field, he never really made an eagle because he gave up his growth in order to teach his contemporaries. This demonstrates how much he valued the importance of working together with others. He was also trained by his father around firearms at home, and by the time he was 10 years old, the young lad was able to shoot without any problems. Van Cleef's mother instilled in him a deep respect for the arts, despite the fact that he was a somewhat normal young man of his time period. It was of great interest to him to acquire the skills necessary to sing, play the trombone, and play the piano. As Van Cleef got older, his interest in the theater also increased, and he started to experiment with this pastime by taking part in school plays. However, even back then, there was something about his stage presence and interpretations that had the ability to capture audiences. Regrettably, in a nation that was afflicted by the economic crisis of the 1930s, Van Cleef was unable to afford to dream beyond his small community, and the performances were merely hobbies that he did in order to keep the spirit alive. For the little boy, who had no idea of the misfortunes that were waiting for him in the future, life appeared to be going well. Van Cleef obtained a menial position at a farm at the conclusion of his junior year in 1942. He left his employment during the summer to return to school in order to continue his education for his final year. There is a possibility that Van Cleef's decision to enlist in the military during his final year was influenced by the fact that his father had served for 2 years in Europe during World War I. Due to this, he was able to enroll in the specialized program that offered accelerated and streamlined classes, which enabled him to graduate at the age of 17 and begin a career in the Navy. Following the completion of his military training, Van Cleef was assigned to work as a submarine chaser. Subsequently, he was transferred to the minesweeper USS Incredible, where he worked as a sonar man. The ship conducted patrols in the Caribbean Sea before going to the Mediterranean Sea in order to assist in the execution of Operation Dragoon, which helped facilitate the legendary landings in southern France. After that, the ship relocated to the Black Sea in order to resume its tasks of air-sea rescue patrols and sweeping operations. Van Cleef was eventually discharged from the service in March of 1946, having earned his minesweeper patch and reached the rank of Sonar Man First Class during his time in the military. Additionally, he was honored with the Bronze Star, the Good Conduct Medal, the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the American Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. All of these medals were acquired during his service in the military. Although Van Cleef had already left his imprint on the world at the age of 21, he had done it at a significant cost. His time spent serving in the Navy had taken him to a location that was halfway around the world. There, he had the opportunity to see firsthand the devastation that war and shattered society can do. When he was asked in a later interview how it felt to revisit those places as an actor working on his projects, he had this to say: "Well, it's always a thrill to see a place when it's not at war, and we have to agree with him on that point." What happens after the war? Van Cleef had his entire life ahead of him when he went home to his wife and high school love, Ruth Cayley, when he was 21 years old. On the other hand, the house he went back to was not at all like the one he had left. When Van Cleef was a little lad, he had left his house with a sense of excitement in his eyes. When he returned, he found a home that recounted stories of the difficulties of war. His love for the outdoors led him to a job at a hunting and fishing camp in Maine, and it was most likely because of the 19 years of experience he had gained since the canoe trip we discussed earlier. He was determined to move on from the war and establish a home for himself. Following his participation in the preparations for the season alongside his fellow workers, he went on to work as a farmhand at the residence of a socialite. Van Cleef was in his element when he was doing what he loved in the great outdoors. However, when he and his wife started having children, the pressure that they were under financially became intolerable. The income he received from working on a farm was no longer sufficient to provide for his 3 children. So he was forced to take a job at a plant as a time-study techniques and motions analyzer in order to make ends meet. He had something to say about that period of his life. "I'd never said I'd work indoors in my life." He was referring to the time when he was working inside. "But I broke my promise and did it anyhow, in order to provide a brighter future for their children." I feel that many parents and guardians can empathize with the idea of stepping outside of their comfort zone. Van Cleef was fortunate enough to pull off a successful deal, which was also the first move he took for the rest of his life. Beginnings in acting that were humble. At the time, Van Cleef had already decided that he would spend the rest of his life working in a plant. However, a colleague of his suggested that he become a member of the Music Hall Musicians in Clinton, New Jersey. His first job was as a reader in the play Our Town, and he continued to meet the group and audition for parts after he was cast in the aforementioned role. After a long period of perseverance, Van Cleef was ultimately rewarded with a more significant role in the play Heaven Can Wait, in which he played the boxer Joe Pendleton. The director of the play was so pleased by his stage presence and delivery that he took him to New York to offer him the opportunity to study dramatics. His portrayal of this character was the push that he never knew he needed, and it was exactly what he needed. Considering that Van Lee had not regarded acting to be a job, but rather a hobby, the offer came as a complete surprise to him. Even though Van Cleef had stumbled onto a first-class entry during the tryouts at the Alvin Theater, he still needed to demonstrate his worth to the director and outperform the competition, which consisted of more than 500 men. After landing the character of Mr. Roberts in the play Mr. Roberts, Van Lee embarked on a tour that lasted for 15 months and performed at a variety of destinations. This was despite the fact that the prospects of outperforming properly trained actors appeared to be minimal. There was no turning back now that Van Cleef's life had taken an unexpected turn for the better overnight. This opportunity began his career and brought him to the attention of Stanley Kramer, who was ready to cast him after seeing his performance as the policeman in the show. As a result, Stanley offered Van Cleef his first film role, which was on High Noon. However, there was a little twist that you might want to keep an eye out for. An invitation to Hollywood. Talent is the only thing that can bring you to Hollywood, but nothing can prepare you for the odd requirements that executives make. In this interview, Van Cleef revealed that reciting lines was not sufficient for him to be considered for the role of Mr. Rogers in the play Mr. Rogers. He was not an exception to this rule. In order to demonstrate his muscle, the legendary figure was required to remove his jacket, shirt, and pants during the audition process. In point of fact, He freely admits that as of that moment, his reading skills were not the best. It came as a surprise that his reading did not prevent him from being offered the position, and he was given instructions to begin the next day. In your opinion, those muscles must have been fairly impressive. Don't you disagree? Despite the fact that many ambitious actors would have jumped at the chance, Van Cleef did not take advantage of it. He stated that he asked the production crew to give him 2 weeks to submit his resignation and hand it over to the next accountant. He also requested that they give him the opportunity to do so. The fact that Van Cleef remained a man of honor, despite the fact that magnificent chance was staring him in the face, is something that I must say is impressive. Thankfully, his boss allowed him to make use of the situation by firing him, which prevented him from actually hurting himself. In light of the fact that Van Cleef was the one who was responsible for launching a star, I believe that this individual should be given a special mention when we sing his praises. Wait until you hear about Stanley Kramer's request if you think it's crazy that you have to undergo a stripping process in order to play a role. When Stanley attempted to cast Van Cleef in the role of Deputy Harvey Pell for his upcoming picture High Noon, he had envisioned Van Cleef performing the role. Nevertheless, the offer was contingent upon Van Cleef repairing his nose in order to be considered. According to the actor, this notion did not sit well with him, and he promptly declined the position with some harsh words. After that, Stanley contacted him back and offered him the part of the silent gunslinger Jack Colby for a weekly salary of $500, which solidified his position as the central antagonist of the West. What are your thoughts on the decision that Van Cleef made? In order to improve your chances of landing a leading role in your first film, would you have been willing to get your nose fixed? However, one thing that is plainly evident is that despite being in the 21st century, Hollywood's ways are caught in a time loop. Actors and actresses are still coming out to call out unethical activities in the industry, which is a clear indication that Hollywood is stuck in a time loop. It was the cowboy who was unable to ride. When we talk about Van Cleef, it is almost inconceivable to think that he was unable to ride until he was required to do so for his role in the film High Note, which was his first cinematic career. Since he had spent his childhood on a farm, he ought to have been able to perform that task as soon as he was able to walk, right? That turned out not to be the case, and even his time spent working on farms did not adequately prepare him for horseback riding. During this interview, it was stated that horses in Somerville were quite uncommon, as a result of the fact that the farmers relied solely on trucks and tractors. Van Cleef sought the assistance of Rance Howard in order to become proficient in horse riding when he was offered a function on High Noon. Between the beginning of August and the middle of September, the two of them went out on a daily basis, during which time Van Cleef learned how to ride, dismount, run, and walk a horse. His unwavering dedication to exceeding expectations in his first role was a reflection of his strong work ethic and a testament to his devotion to going above and beyond. As a result of his dogged determination, he was able to secure a memorable performance, which placed him on the path to becoming one of the most formidable villains in Hollywood. An accident and a separation. As of the year 1958, Van Cleef had established himself as a prominent figure within the Western genre, earning the respect and admiration of the performers who were in his immediate vicinity. Unfortunately, this positive development in his life was about to take a turn for the worse, which would force him to grapple with the prospect of committing himself. In the fall of 1958, Van Cleef was engaged in an accident while driving home from Lone Pine, California, where he was filming for the film Ride Lonesome. The accident occurred while he was traveling home. A head-on collision with another vehicle resulted in him sustaining 2 fractures on his left arm and a shattered kneecap on his left foot. He also sustained a broken kneecap on his left foot. The physicians believed that Van Cleef would never be able to walk without a limp or ride a horse again. As a result, he had to be hospitalized for a period of 1 month in order to receive treatment. Given that the actor was only starting to establish a name for himself in the Hollywood industry, the news must have been quite upsetting for him. In the end, if you were unable to mount a horse, you would not be able to play the role of the wild cowboy of the West. In light of the fact that Van Cleef had a lengthy and challenging road to recovery ahead of him, he was forced to leave the scene due to his injury. That he would be able to regain his position as an actor is not something that can be guaranteed. During the most difficult time of this tragedy, Van Cleef started drinking to an unhealthy degree, which ultimately led to a rupture in his marriage. After 15 years of marriage and 3 children together, he and his first wife, Patsy Ruth Call, split just a few months after his accident. Unfortunately, the rift in his marriage became irreparable, and they divorced just a few months after his tragedy. Leaving your husband of 15 years in the height of his medical crisis and career slide is not an easy way to justify leaving him, and I must say that there is no simple way to excuse it. As a result of the fact that the records were not made public and that good old TMZ had not yet made its appearance and begun its reign of terror by feasting on every problem, the true cause for the breakup will forever remain a mystery. Challenges in terms of finances and a second marriage. Within 6 months after his accident, Van Cleef was back on a horse, despite the fact that he had been told he would never be able to ride again. Unfortunately, riding with the zeal of a young man who was striving to catch up to his goals was not enough to dull the pain and anguish in his knee, and he could only exert himself to a certain extent. Van Cleef was gradually being phased out of the picture as a result of his inability to keep up with the times. He was only able to score a brief role as a henchman on The Man Who Shot, Liberty Valance, and an uncredited cameo as a river pirate in How the West Was Won. Van Cleef found himself in a difficult financial situation as a result of the dearth of filming opportunities, and he ultimately made the decision that it was time for him to put up his Hollywood boots. In spite of the dreary days, Van Cleef was able to find love and marry his second wife, Joan Marjorie Drain, in the year 1960. Furthermore, the pair adopted a daughter named Denise. Even though Joan worked as a secretary at IBM, her income was not sufficient to support all of them. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had to resort to working as a painter in order to augment the income he was receiving from residuals. Oh wow, I can't even begin to fathom the idea of having to persuade your friends that you are certain that you have seen the man who painted your house on television, especially in a time when there were no cameras to back you up. It appeared for a brief period of time that Van Cleef's career had come to an end before it had even begun. In addition to the fact that his injury had made him a less desirable choice for major roles, the Western genre had gradually begun to lose appeal, and the opportunity to resurrect his career was even more difficult to come by. There is probably not a single living person who could have predicted Van Cleef's turnaround at that moment in time. A ray of light arrived at the end of the tunnel in the form of the Italian film director, Sergio Leone, just as the final flicker of hope for Van Cleef's career was beginning to fade away. Following the critical and commercial success of his debut Western, he was looking for another major project to work on. Van Cleef was one of the 2 actors that Sergio had in mind for his next picture. As stated in this interview, Van Cleef was one of the actors that Sergio had in mind. In a state of financial destitution and unable to pay his phone bill, Van Cleef was clinging to life by a thread. It was fortunate for him that his circumstances were about to change in a single meeting, as Sergio quickly cast him in the role of Colonel Mortimer in A Few More Dollars, which also starred Clint Eastwood. It was beginning to look up for the actor as he was paid $17,000 for his portrayal, and was rocketed to stardom as the picture was a box office blockbuster across Europe, Canada, and America, generating up to $25 million worldwide. The actor's life was beginning to look up. After discovering a treasure trove, the 3 actors got back together the next year for the film The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. Van Cleef played Angel Eyes, a part that he would never be able to shake off, and he also appeared in The Big Gun Down, a picture in which he deviated from his typical performances as villains. Both films garnered positive reviews from audiences all over the world. However, The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, which had a total worldwide gross of $38.9 million, emerged victorious in that particular year. Within just 2 years of working together, Van Lee received a pay raise that increased his salary from $17,000 to over $100,000. This was a result of the success of the films that Sergio and Van Lee had produced together. A number of spaghetti westerns, including Death Rides a Horse, Day of Anger, The Grand Duel, Sabata, and Return of Sabata, were among the films that Van Cleef continued to collaborate with Sergio on. This international success brought Van Cleef back to the attention of American film producers, and he was subsequently cast in roles in films like As Armed Responses, Escape from New York, and The Octagon, in which he also appeared opposite Chuck Norris. During the course of his career, Van Cleef had 109 television credits and 90 film credits, which is a pretty respectable accumulation of work. What are the difficulties of working so far away from home? The opportunity that Van Cleef had been waiting for may have been presented to him by Sergio Leone, but it did not come to him on a silver platter just like that. He had to travel a great distance away from his family, including his wife and children, in order to find work in a foreign country where he had a difficult time understanding the language. During an interview with Alex Cox, Van Cleef revealed that throughout the production of A Few More Dollars, he was required to make use of an interpreter on set. This was due to the fact that Sergio Leone was unable to communicate in English, and the other actors on set either spoke Italian, German, or Spanish. The efforts that Van Cleef made to master the languages were unsuccessful, and who can blame him for that? When you are surrounded by people who speak 3 distinct languages, which particular language do you choose to speak? Thankfully, the language barrier did not prevent them from making hits at the box office, and the crew collaborated to ensure that everyone was aware of exactly what was expected of them. When Sergio returned for his second film, he was already able to speak English, and his fluency continued to improve from that point forth. The language barrier was a temporary problem that Sergio was able to overcome. Van Cleef also brought attention to the fact that the technical team in Europe was not as well trained as their counterparts in the United States, which resulted in a major slowdown of the production process. A further unanticipated obstacle was the extremely lengthy length of the screenplays that were being written in Italy. The previous roles that Van Cleef had played frequently required him to use very few words, but in this particular role, he was given scripts that chose the sentence structure that was the longest. In keeping with his status as a legend, he made adjustments to the script in areas where they were required and allowed his presence to do most of the talking. In spite of these relatively modest obstacles, Van Cleef took pleasure in his profession regardless of where it took him. In addition, he had a deep appreciation for inventiveness and brilliance in Europe, and he was delighted to be a part of that. In response to the question of how he felt about working on the Italian films, he responded by saying, "No, it doesn't matter where I work. It is not an American institution, but rather a global enterprise that is the film industry. The work is where you go to find it. My own backyard, Israel, Spain, or Yugoslavia might be the location of the event. It is possible that we have the highest level of technical efficiency in the world, but it does not necessarily mean that our creative values are the best." What is the status of Van Lee's injury? Although the accident that Van Lee sustained was a turning point in his career and had an impact on his ability to ride, it did not hinder his on-screen presence or his portrayal of characters. Romano Pupo, a stuntman, was brought in to step in as Van Cleef's stunt double for the film. There was a few additional bucks involved, but it was necessary because Van Cleef was no longer able to ride like a seasoned horseman. Nevertheless, Van Cleef, who is a horseman at heart and a professional, continued to shoot scenes on a circus horse that was brought in to provide a more comfortable ride for the passengers. This is the second divorce. After a marriage that lasted for 14 years, Van Cleef and his second wife split when he was at the pinnacle of his profession. Nevertheless, the specifics of the divorce remained a mystery to everyone involved. After a period of less than 2 years, Van Cleef tied the knot with Barbara Haviland, a concert violinist whom he had met during the production of The Stranger and the Gunfighter in 1974. A legendary figure who, throughout his entire career, received not even a modest bit of recognition. Van Cleef was a very underrated actor throughout his time period, despite the fact that he was considered to be one of the Western genre's top actors. As a result of his roles going overlooked and his skill going undeveloped until Sergio Leone took a chance on him, he is a perfect example of a legend that is not celebrated in his own country. The narrative was altered by the critics in a relatively short amount of time once the excitement around his box office performance subsided. When Van Cleef was asked about his feelings over the lack of critical recognition in his later works, he responded by saying, "I can understand it, but I don't agree with it. despite the fact that audiences all around the world continued to appreciate his work right up until the time that he retired. I am inclined to agree with his comments. I don't believe in a great deal of what the critics say. The Golden Boot Award was given to Van Cleef in 1983 for his contribution to the Western film and television genre. This award was the only one he received from the industry and will be remembered as a significant accomplishment during his lifetime. As a result of his personal principles, Van Cleef was not offered any positions. Van Cleef was a man of principle, and despite the fact that he portrayed characters that were aggressive, the actor had an unwritten rule book that he used to determine whether or not a picture was in line with his principles. During this interview, he discussed the importance of truth being the prevailing force. This meant that violent criminals, sexual offenders, and murders would not be allowed to go without any consequences. As a result of his unwavering commitment to these principles, he was occasionally overlooked for roles in films that went against his personal beliefs. Additionally, Van Cleef remained steadfast in his belief that he should not inflict harm on children, women, or dogs, even when acting out a character. Concerning the blow that he delivered to a woman in his critically acclaimed picture The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he was questioned. Due to the fact that he had declined to perform the slap sequence, he emphasized that it had been performed by a stunt woman, as stated by Van Cleef. The woman was adamant about being hit after the incident. Do you believe that they made her an additional offer for that? Being confined to a character. Despite the fact that Van Cleef was one of the most versatile actors of his era, he was relegated to the role of a villain throughout his whole career. Although he made an effort to explore more heroic films, his role frequently remained ethically ambiguous throughout the film. Being unable to escape this bubble, Van Cleef embraced his wicked characters and injected a touch of compassion and sympathy into them. This was done in order to give the characters more depth and to make it easier for audiences to comprehend the villains in the movie. The following is what he had to say about his reign as a villain that never seemed to end. I've always been a fan of negative characters. Despite my best efforts, I appear to be cruel. On screen, audiences have a natural tendency to despise me. In the event that I were to perform a role in a tuxedo, people would consider me to be repulsive. There is a lot more that can be done with a villain role. Films are replete with leading guys, the majority of whom are not now employed. Getting a good villain is a considerably more difficult task. A criticism of the violent content of his films. Van Cleef was a calm man who kept his words to himself away from the big screen, despite the fact that he was often portrayed as a badass on screen. In response to a question concerning the depictions of violence in his films, he elaborated on the fact that there is a dearth of genuine depictions of violence on screen. While the watered-down violence was entertaining for television, it gave the impression that it was all fun and games until someone actually got wounded for engaging in the same behavior. He also discussed his experiences of meeting people in public and the fact that some of them wanted to connect with him in the same way that they would with his on-screen characters. On a few occasions, he was forced to defend himself since his attempts to de-escalate the situation in a respectful manner were unsuccessful. Getting into a fight with a former member of the military and expecting to walk away unscathed is a fairly audacious move, if I may say so myself. Failed to live up to daddy duties. It is possible that Van Cleef survived his time spent serving in the military, an injury, and even bouts that were nearly impossible to perform on screen. In spite of this, he sustained a serious injury to his right arm while playing daddy duty over the weekend. This finger, which was extensively featured in the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, had the final joint missing, and it left many viewers wondering whether he received it in a bar fight or if it was an accident that he had previously experienced. However, the reality is not nearly as spectacular as his on-screen followers would have liked it to be, because the injury occurred when he was constructing a playhouse for his daughter, which is a popular culture influence. One of the most significant moments in the history of film is Lee Van Cleef's influence on the Western genre, character representation, and stage presence. This moment is nothing short of revolutionary. Throughout the years, his characters have been used as a source of inspiration for other villains, and they have also been parodied. His influence has garnered a lot of attention. A breath of fresh air is the fact that this narrative continues to live on in popular culture. The legend has also been exploited as a source of inspiration for visual and musical endeavors. It's possible that Death Van Cleef was the forceful character that the crowd needed to see on film. On the other hand, he struggled with his health behind closed doors. Due to the severity of his heart ailment, he was dependent on a pacemaker. The end. In the city of Oxnard, California, on the 16th of December in the year 1989, Van Cleef passed out in his residence. Even though he was taken to St. John's Hospital, he did not survive his arrival there. The secondary cause of death for Van Cleef was throat cancer, which he had got by smoking the pipe. He had passed away as a result of a heart attack, which was the primary cause of death. Fans and peers alike were shaken by the news of his passing. Those who attended his burial paid respect to him by donning cowboy hats and attending the funeral in Western garb. The friend of Van Cleef, Rance Howards, delivered a eulogy for him, and Rory Calhoun, Harry Carey Jr., and other individuals brought him to the location where he would be laid to rest. His wife and close friend Barbara Havalone were the only people who survived him after his passing. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Hollywood Hills, California. You are appreciated for watching. Those interested in learning more about the pioneers of Hollywood can do so by clicking on the following video.